Hey everybody, welcome to the phosphorus cycle, APES topic 1.6. So the phosphorus cycle is the movement of phosphorus around the biosphere, mainly between land and water, terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. There's really no gas phase. The only time that phosphorus really enters the atmosphere is as dust and when it mixes with the rainwater. That's basically it. The major reservoir of phosphorus is going to be rocks and minerals comprised of phosphorus containing materials, and that's going to be a part of what we're going to look at in our abiotic processes. Phosphorus rarely changes form. It's typically found in the form of phosphate or PO4-. So phosphorus why is it important to us? It's a major component of DNA and RNA and ATP, so it directly affects us. It's literally part of what we're made of. It's a limiting nutrient in plants, and it greatly affects the plants in both agricultural sense, but also in terms of what's the species that exist naturally in ecosystems. It's second only to nitrogen in terms of its actual impact on the environment. So it's commonly used in fertilizers, just like nitrogen is, and we're going to see the impacts of that in a moment. So we can see a little glimpse here. We can see that there really is no gaseous phase. It's mainly been moving between terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems for various reasons. And let's take a look at that. So assimilation and mineralization. These are biotic processes. So assimilation is going to be when plants and animals take in the inorganic phosphate and assimilate in the phosphorus into their tissues. Again, like we said before, as part of their DNA, RNA, and ATP. Over time, what's going to happen is that these species are going to produce waste products and also eventually die. And when that waste product is produced, or when these species do die, their bodies are going to be decomposed by decomposers such as fungi and bacteria. And this is going to convert that organic phosphorus back into inorganic phosphate. Now, what's going to occur, what also is occurring at the same time are abiotic processes, meaning non-living things that's not part of a living thing. So phosphorus is tightly held by soils, so like we saw before when we were talking about terrestrial biomes and other nutrients, leaching really isn't too much of a problem, meaning like when rainwater comes down and pulls the soil, the nutrients through the soil, it's going to mainly be it's mainly going to be staying in place. Now, sedimentation is when phosphorus is not very soluble in water and it precipitates out of the solution and forms a phosphorus-laden sediment. So it begins to form a solid, and that's going to sink to the bottom of the ocean or other water bodies. And over time, what was once underwater due to geologic changes, such as the moving of the tectonic plates, this is going to cause geologic uplift. This forces what was once at the bottom of the ocean to come up above the water level and eventually actually can be part of mountains. And what's going to happen is that weathering, meaning like basically rainfall or other weather events such as hurricanes and things like that, these phosphate rocks in the mountains are slowly going to be eroded or weathered by this rainfall, which brings the phosphorus to terrestrial as well as aquatic ecosystems. Now, humans have an immense impact on the phosphorus cycle. Humans mine the phosphate sediment to produce fertilizer, but our overuse of fertilizers allows the excess phosphorus to leach back into water bodies. Now, aquatic habitats are limited by the usual amount of phosphorus, so they are adapted to a certain amount, and the species live relatively in harmony with that amount. However, when we introduce larger amounts of phosphorus, this is going to have a big impact, especially on the growth of algae. So when algae receives an increase in the amount of phosphorus available in their ecosystem, this can lead to an algal bloom. So this quickly increases the biomass of algae, allowing them to grow and spread, such as species like cyanobacteria, and some produce dangerous chemicals when they bloom. They're also called toxic blooms. So these toxins harm humans, pets, domesticated animals, and wildlife, both terrestrial and aquatic. Results in terms of impacting on humans, results in closing of beaches and shutdowns of intake pipes for public water. So it could cut the public off from their access to water. Now, algal blooms has a huge impact on water quality. As they die, the algae, their decomposition consumes large amounts of oxygen. And when there's less oxygen available in the water, that leads to what we call hypoxic conditions, or hypoxia, which is where there's low amounts of oxygen in the water. This is thus going to kill fish and other species because they derive their water from the fluid of oxygen from the fluid of water, liquid. We derive our oxygen from the fluid of air, which is a gas. So it's referred to as a dead zone, when the only species really thriving is the algae, and all the species are immensely impacted due to the lack of oxygen. So again, just to reiterate, the stratified water is going to increase toxic cyanobacteria blooms, again, increasing phosphorus. That leads to them decreasing the amount of sunlight, because again, like we see before in these pictures up here, you really can't get sunlight through a layer that thick, decreasing amounts of oxygen. Thus, other species of algae, fish, plants, and animals are going to die, sink to the bottom, and they're going to increase what we call muck, which is eventually going to be broken down by decomposers and other species, and that then releases nutrients back into the environment, thus giving the cyanobacterial blooms, these toxic algal blooms, more nutrients and energy. Now, another big source besides fertilizers is detergents, laundry detergents. From 1940s to 1990s, laundry detergents in the United States contained a large amount of phosphates. Actually, around the world they did. Led to the creation of various dead zones, which had a huge economic and ecological impact. Now, manufacturers stopped adding phosphates in 1994 in the United States, and several states since 2010 have actually had partial or full bans on the use of phosphates in cleaning laundry detergents. European Union banned phosphates in laundry detergents in 2013, but also expanded it to ban them in dishwashing detergents in 2017. So again, as we see here, when we begin to upset the cycle, this is we're going to be when we're adding more phosphorus to these ecosystems, it's going to have an immense impact. One of the biggest ones we could see here in terms of economic, ecological, is going to be at the Gulf of Mexico, where the Mississippi River feeds down into there. It has an enormous, actually the largest algal bloom in the world, and these these hypoxic conditions, these low oxygen conditions, are going to kill off many different species, including shellfish, which then impacts the not only natural ecosystem but also the economy of that area, which relies heavily on fishing. Now, other impacts in terms of what's going to impact on wildlife is that, for instance, the big example is the Florida Everglades. So Florida has had a huge increase in the amount of agricultural expansion, especially over the last 60, 70 years. This led to an increase in phosphorus levels and water flowing through the ecosystem, which again, like we saw with other nutrient cycles, can favor certain species and harm others. So cattail plants became more common and sawgrass began to decline. And many species rely on sawgrass and not as many rely on cattails. So when you have what's we'll look at later this year, a monoculture, meaning you begin to see a larger amount of area taken up by just one species or very few species, a decrease in biodiversity, that's going to have ripple effects that affect other species as well. So animals that depend on the sawgrass face reduced food and habitat because of this loss of biodiversity due to the increase in phosphate favoring the growth of these cattail species. So again, humans have an immense impact on the environment, and just by simply controlling what chemicals we release into the natural environment is going to have impacts not only on just the species that live there, but also on humans themselves, as well as an immense economic impact.